consult and helped run a company called VIOLA Brands, which is now called Village, to win licenses in Maryland and Missouri. We applied for licenses here in Illinois, and just really kind of looking to increase the minority ownership within the space. And yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
Perfect. Let's jump to the one and only Edie.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am Edie Moore. I am currently the executive director of Chicago Nrml, which is a local chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And what our chapter has been doing since our founding in 2017 is specifically to educate communities of color about the plant and about the opportunities that lie within the cannabis space here in Illinois. We want them to find their voice and their power to promote equity and economic development within their own communities.
Thank you, Edie, very much. Let's go to Candace.
Hello, everybody. I'm Candace Clark. I'm the co-founder of Hitec Consulting. In October of last year, I left my original position as a federal government IT contractor to offer services in the realm of development, IT consulting in the cannabis space for ancillary businesses as well as cannabis businesses.
Thank you, Candace. Appreciate that. Let's jump over to my man, Ron.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ron Holmes. I've been involved in the Illinois cannabis market for the last 2 years, representing the industry. And about 14 months ago, I founded the Majority Minority Group with the express intent of making sure we put color in the cannabis industry.
I love it. I love it. Let's go to my good friend, Richard.
Yeah, Richard Wallace, founded Equity and Transformation. Our mission is to build social equity for street economy folks and formal economy workers. I'm excited to be on the call.
And Moises.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moises Zavala, the Director of Organizing for Local 881 of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, the cannabis union here in Illinois, assisting and supporting the workers in the industry to unionize, to improve the working conditions, but also to help turn these jobs into career opportunities. Thank you.
That's important work. Thank you so much, Moises. And then last but certainly not least, the one and only, Vic Mensa, please.
I'm Vic. I'm an artist and activist and founder of an organization called SMSL, a grassroots organization that combats systemic oppression. And I've just recently stepped into the cannabis space through applying for multiple licenses and bugging most of the people on this panel about how to get down.
And thank you guys so much for introducing yourselves. Again, this is a really, really talented panel. So we're just gonna jump right into it with the first question or subject that we have for the day, all right? So our first subject is the opposite of social equity. We're focusing on the obvious inequities of the cannabis industry because there are many, as we know. In fact, MJ Biz Daily recently published a series of articles highlighting the different social equity programs across the country, from California to Michigan to Illinois. Social equity is either flawed and lacking or just plain non-existent. So let's talk about that. Do any of you feel like social equity programs can truly work? And what might be needed for them to work if they can at all? Let anybody jump in.
I'll jump in. My experience has only been with the Illinois Social Equity Program, which is really in its infancy. I have great hopes that it can work and that it has a long way to go. And that's because advocates like us didn't get everything we wanted, but who gets everything they want the first time out. So that's the job that we have at hand, is to continue to push and fight and ask for those things to make it better and to make it work. And I really think that the administration, the current administration, is like no other that we've seen before in Illinois. And if you count the top leaders in the state, they are all people, they're people of color. So I think they're willing to get down and do this work and to make it happen.
Anybody else want to chime in with that?
I guess I can chime in.
Ron.
Sorry. Go ahead, Ron.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like it can work, but we have to really hone in on what social equity is. You know, I've heard a lot of stories of people applying as social equity applicants because they got arrested back in 1972. And to be honest, whether they got arrested or not, we have to also look at where they are now, you know, and what resources they have available to them, and really hone in on what true social equity is and support those people.
Now look at
I was just gonna say, like, I think that I view social equity a lot more holistic than licensing, right? So the question of like, should cannabis revenues go directly back to communities? Can they work? Yes, like that's something that every state can like take seriously. Expungement and like changing people's lives by no longer having them check a box on applications, I think is a no-brainer. But I'm going to be like a little more blunt than I have been like historically over the process. And the reality is that it's been a long process for not just the applicants, but I think for the administration too, as they struggle with that balance of making sure that they can provide an application process that really gives licenses to Black and brown people, right? And that's the other thing, like we keep saying social equity, but like the state can't say it for legal reasons. But like for me, like I want to see people of color get licenses, right? People that have had their, lives disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. So it's going to be a long dance, right? Like I've got no faith that even if you awarded all 75 dispensary licenses, all 40 infusion, all 40 craft grows to all Black and brown people, that we've achieved social equity, right? Because for decades and decades and decades, our communities have been ravaged. So this is going to take time. But whether or not people continue to kind of like hold on in good faith after round one, I think is to be determined by like what this licensing looks like.
Yeah, you're right about that, Ron. We've got some catching up to do.
No doubt. And I think, one thing I want to mention is, we always talk about social equity, and I think a lot of times people just jump to poor people, right? But in reality, this affects everybody. No matter, if you're, a person of color and you've been affected by the war on drugs, whether it's family related, whether it's, being racially profiled, all those things kind of affect all of us of color. And so I think, programs and social equity programs are very limiting in their language sometimes because they want to protect the folks that they think are deemed, social equity. And so I've done stuff in a few other states where they've actually have outlined on the application process, you get more points for being a woman, you get more points for being Native American, more points for being African-American, Black. And I think those things and those topics are tough to come by when it comes to legislation, because obviously some of those things are unconstitutional in certain states. But, from my experiences, there are states that have tried to do it the right way. I think Illinois tried to do it the right way and have done so far. But to Ron's point, there's a lot of catching up to do, not just with ownership, but also too with ancillary businesses. So we can obviously get into that, with a few other questions.
All right. And this is Moises, and even from the worker perspective, in our experience in the labor movement, to get to social equity, we have to push back. We have to fight to make that happen. Currently, workers in this industry are seeing a whole host of issues, from misclassification, obviously low wages, to the typical, unfortunately, the typical problems that we see in other industries, where we felt when this industry was just starting, we thought that we were going to have a different kind of perspective. And, we're seeing the same thing. And just like we do with every other industry, we're going to make sure that we participate, that we push back to really improve the conditions for the employees.
This is Rich here. And so I agree with all of the panelists so far. I think one of the things that I want to try to do is like ground us in the fight for equity. Racial equity is, I mean, people use the term all the time, but essentially it's about applying justice and a little bit of common sense to a system that has been out of balance. And I think that when we talk about how it got out of balance, we got to recognize the impact of the Compassionate Care Act. And so in order, I'm going back there so you understand, so folks that are listening can see how far we have to go. The Compassionate Care Act was one of the most racist, classist, elitist cannabis programs in the nation. It excluded most of the victims from the war on drugs from applying through background checks and the cost of licensing. And I think we got to be very we got to be very specific. Like communities where they had the highest rates. I mean, where communities like the disproportionately impacted communities like Austin, Inglewood, West Garfield Park, the per capita income is damn near $20,000 below the average per capita income in the city of Chicago. And that set the framework for the imbalance around racial equity that we're discussing today. So when new outlets celebrate, you know, like the $40 million or almost $40 million that an all-white cannabis industry gained in the first month of sales, while black and brown folks were still in jail for minor cannabis offenses, they're in fact celebrating inequity, right? So we can't celebrate this industry right now, regardless of, you know, I'm really excited about some of the wins that we've seen, but we really can't celebrate anything until we're actually included. And I think that once we see these licenses get distributed, right, we may have a closer, a better picture on what that looks like, but those individuals are coming 5 years late to the table, to the party, right? And so what are the services and wraparound investments that we need in order to make sure that those businesses, companies, et cetera, are sustainable? And so that's where my mind is at on that question.
Obviously everyone has pretty much summed up the answer to the question, but just to kind of chime in, I do want to first off start by saying that I'm super thankful for the Illinois administration for passing the bill. I know there were a lot of issues. The timing was a big issue. And really this was the only opportunity to do it. So that's number one. What I'm seeing is some people are trying to work around it. That's a huge problem. It's more like it's becoming affirmative action. And I don't know how that's even a thing. I don't know how someone is going into with the spirit of the bill, looking at it and saying, how can I work around it? So to kind of combat that, I think the way it was, the spirit of the bill and the way it was written in, it had a certain intention, but because.
Oh, Johnny, you muted, Johnny.
Something happened.
Yeah, I can't hear you. All right, we can't.
Y'all know I live in the boondocks. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. You
Yeah,
get cut off. You get cut off. You can go ahead.
I was saying that basically people are treating it like affirmative action. We all know that, but I think we're going to have to take it a step further past the licensing stage and really think about how we can enforce it and make sure that equity goes across the board after post-licensing.
That's a great point, because when you look at what's kind of happening in the space and kind of the application process in general, the way the state kind of set it up, you know, they heavily weighted towards social equity. I can't see someone, you know, these application processes come down to sometimes 2 points from like the top best score to sometimes the lowest score. And so they weighted it so much with social equity. I can't see how an applicant can win a license and not have social equity a part of their application. So I do think that's a great thing into having it. I just hope, to your point, Shawnee, that post the license, those folks that are the 51% or above owners are getting their fair share. And I think that's where it really kind of affects me, because, you know, look, I don't mind if you want to sell your license, you win it, you earn it, you deserve it, right? But if you're selling it for pennies on the dollar, I do think that the state should look in and say, all right, well, how much are you actually selling your license for? This is the value of the license. And the state should kind of act as, I don't want to say the broker, but more so the educator to the social equity applicant, and saying, look, you selling your 51% for $100,000, it's not enough, right? These licenses.
And if they don't, we should.
Yeah, these licenses are selling for, you know, $5, $10, $20, $15 million. Your fair share should be X, right? And so I think that should be an education piece the state should make, when eventually we all know that a lot of these licenses will end up flipping in the reverse order with, you know, white-owned companies controlling the majority, and that social equity applicant then kind of moving down, you know, in the equity chain.
Yeah, Jamil, I don't think it's just the administration though, right? I think that it's on all of us to like start a serious conversation about what this looks like for people that win these licenses, and basically say like, look, you received this license pretty much because you were a minority, at least sell it to another minority-owned company. Like, between all the folks that applied, we should be able to keep this wealth within our own communities, versus the notion of just like being a quick broker for whoever is gonna, pay pennies on the dollar. So I think it's on all of us, Jamil. But yeah, I mean, to your point, we definitely got to watch this over the next couple months.
No doubt. I wouldn't be opposed to having, if you win a social equity license, then that license has to be social equity into the forever of time, right? And so if, that just exists out there, but yeah, definitely we got to, figure that out.
Hopefully, have
some there's some policy work that can be done there. I think.
Tell us what to do, Edie. Just tell us when to go, Edie.
We follow you.
There's policy work for that.
I want to thank you. That's some really great dialogue. Just some of the ideas that are being floated around here are really great. But we're going to move on for the sake of time to the second topic that we have today. So question number 2, or topic number 2. Cannabis is hot right now. Everybody knows that. But there's a really big focus on dispensing organizations or grow operations in terms of job generation, revenue generation, excuse me. But specifically for people of color, what opportunities are there for our communities to get involved in the cannabis industry aside from dispensing or growing? Because there's a lot of opportunities, and you guys kind of embody all of those other opportunities. So please feel free to just jump on it. Where can folks get involved? What can they do to get into this industry?
I think it's so natural for us to think about plant touching, because that's what makes the most sense, and it's almost like it's sexy, right? No one kind of thinks of everything else, but literally the opportunities are endless. Anything from marketing to being a supplier, distribution for craft growing cultivators, technology, auditing, compliance, human resources, recruiting, legal, accounting. We need all of those people in the industry. And that's one thing, like, I drive home any chance I get. I have people who walk up to me and are specialists in HVAC, but want to be a bud tender. And I'm like, nah, home, like, we need you in HVAC in the industry. And so one of the things I really want to kind of talk about, I feel like we kind of have this, as minorities, we are a little nervous to kind of get into something as entrepreneurs, and really step out on faith. And one of the things that I'm seeing is people in the cannabis industry kind of feel like they have to give you permission to enter into the industry. And I really want to make sure people understand no one needs to give you permission to do what you know. I think a lot of times we kind of get boxed in, and if it's not about social equity, then they don't want to hear it. So those are kind of like my main points about ancillary businesses and supporting businesses for the industry.
Candace, I know you're in technology. Can you want to speak to some of that? Having Black entrepreneurs that are really invested in the tech aspect of cannabis is really huge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, coming from a tech background in general, we're underrepresented. There's not a lot of opportunities to advance in these different companies. And that was one of the reasons why I really jumped on the opportunity to get involved in this industry. I believe my husband went to a general meeting for Chicago Nrml, and Edie here that's really looking for IT help. So that's, it just kind of fell into my lap, but the opportunities are there. And just in my journey as an entrepreneur, I've seen a lot more success in this industry than I have before, because it's so new and people aren't, really understanding exactly every aspect of what it takes to enter the industry. So like Shawnee said, it's a lot of different opportunities for everyone.
Yeah, and I just want to say this and agree with Shawnee and Candace as well. The reason why ownership, and I keep stressing this, is very important, is because typically when you own something, you tend to hire people that look like you or have the same skill set. So, when we're looking at why, Black and brown and minority ownership is so important, because typically you end up hiring, that Black real estate agent, that Black broker, that Black HVAC person. You're looking for Black architects, right? So, when we applied in Illinois, we reached out to Shawnee right away. right? Not because of, just because of the great work she does, but because the team around her does great work, right? And I think that's very important to the industry. And that's why I stress ownership. If you own it, typically you can start hiring your black bartenders, folks in your neighborhood. You can hire the folks around you to give you that advice. And that, again, creates more ancillary work for our community, not just, the typical folks in the industry.
One opportunity that I would like to share is obviously supporting the organizing drives in this industry. I want to recognize Equity and Transformation in their support for the campaign over at Sunnyside in Lakeview. That group of workers won their election back in, I think it was back in late June. And a lot has to do with the support that they see from the community, because this is really a choices that some of these big companies make to either recognize the wishes of their employees who are experts in the industry, right? Or they choose to fight these experts in improving the working conditions. I want to recognize something that Jamil mentioned a while back when he was with Justice Grown. Justice Grown did something very unique in Illinois, and that was to recognize their employees as members of United Food and Commercial Workers. That is a choice that a companies in this industry can do, but a lot has to do with I think the community supporting these experts as employees, and really looking at, again, the opportunities to improve these working conditions from jobs to careers, because not everybody is going to be applying for these licenses, and not everybody, unfortunately, is going to be awarded these licenses. So we want to make sure that those opportunities also exist, even if you're not going to be an owner.
Moises, I think I really appreciate you being on this panel, because you kind of bring us perspective that is often not really looked at in terms of having those workers on the front line. We're seeing that there's a lot of issues with them that they're facing, and not a lot of people are talking about that. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I don't want to discount the opportunities that exist within the advocacy space either, because we didn't know when we started advocating for this plant how many people we would meet, how many people that we could employ, contracts that we would be able to give. Folks who have been working with us have gone on to do a lot of different other things in the space and outside of the space as well. So when you are when you're working within the advocacy space and getting your political feet wet, that's a whole nother ball of wax.
Very true, very true. The dialogue is just amazing. I really wish we would have more conversations like this. I'm really enjoying this. Let's go into
all the time.
I know, but we don't record this and we don't put it out for the community. That's the difference. That's the difference. Also, Vic Mensa is joining us, so that's also a good thing to have. But speaking of it, you are an individual that did invest in. You applied for a license. In terms of diversity, are you seeing that there's a lot of folks that look like us that are applying, or did you see a lack of diversity? Like what spurred you to want to invest in cannabis directly?
I mean, I've been involved in the cannabis industry, I guess, before it was industry.
Informally, right?
Yeah, informally, my whole life. And, just been through the ringer and seeing so many of my brothers and sisters be ensnared and, caught in a cycle of recidivism, often stemming from a pound of weed, something that I know a 40-year-old white dude right now who's selling to dispensaries for $3,800 legally all day, making $100 million a year. And one of my guys has been in and out. He's been honestly living a life of crime ever since he got caught with a pound of weed. And that's an issue, And as far as what I've seen since, you know, my brief foray into the industry, I definitely have been witness to a lot of false social equity and a lot of just kind of propping up of Black faces without real Black infrastructure, you know what I'm saying, behind it by bigger white companies. And you know, that's the game they play. So I think that for me, what is most important, you know, and I think this gets into the next question, I believe, but is, and why I'm so glad to speak to you guys that have so much of a wealth of information in this realm, is that I think it's so important that we demand, yo, my bad, I'm doing something. Yeah.
You good, brother, you good, keep it going.
It's so imperative that we demand that this funding that is being supposedly designated towards, you know, reinvestment and renewal and restoration of our communities be controlled by our communities. It's the day of us being told how we need to heal is over, because we're all in understanding that the institutions and the structures that have been presented to us as those supposed to help are actually obviously there to hurt. The police, the court system, you know, the incarceration system, these things are not actually restoring and renewing anything. So it doesn't make sense that an initiative that is focused on restoration and renewal is going to be spearheaded by the same people that are running the prisons and are running the police. You know what I mean? We got to be able to say how this works. And that's really why I was excited to get on here with y'all today.
Vic, I appreciate you touching on that, man. You transitioned a little bit before, but I appreciate that nonetheless. But you know, Vic is right, and that goes into our third topic, reparations. You know, by and large, reparations is a very growing conversation, talking point across the country. And it looks like cannabis might be the vehicle that delivers some form of reparations to communities most impacted by the war on drugs. In Illinois specifically, we're seeing this take shape. Recently, actually, the city of Evanston decided to take it as far as diverting 100% of its cannabis tax revenue to assisting communities of color, specifically 8 programs for their Black communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs. For me, that's a beautiful program. I was taken back when I saw that. I would love to see that on a state level. But I asked the panel, do you think that municipalities and particularly white-owned cannabis organizations have a social responsibility to give back to communities that have been deemed impacted, or those most impacted by the war on drugs? Because we know, like, you know, Vic just said, they're making a ton of money off of it, but we're not seeing that revenue re-injected into our community. So what do you guys, what's your opinion on that?
I don't think you should be in the cannabis industry unless you realize the political aspects of it, to be completely honest with you. We all know that police brutality and social equity kind of go hand in hand. Once we are, as a group, as a community, and everyone really can realize that the police were originally created to catch runaway slaves, and that cannabis was prohibited so that white men in power could stay in power in their industries, and to create a slave system within the prison system, then we can start having conversations about putting money back into the economy, the Black economy and the brown economy. But you shouldn't be in the industry unless you're thinking about it from a corporate social responsibility standpoint.
This is rich. And so I agree with everything. And I do want to, I'm kind of going to go back to question 2 and then go to question 3, right? Like, let's do real quick. But I was thinking, I want to congratulate UFCW on that shop. That's a big win, I think, for the workers. Because when you talk about, even you think about designation 3 of the social equity applicant, like they have to have 10 employees, but there's no commitment that they are going to get living wages, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of shores up some of those responsibilities. And we need innovation. I agree with all of the comments about innovation, but we also need to watch out for credentialism. And I think that Vic was kind of talking about that. And credentialism is the new racism, the way I look at it, right? We no longer see whites only water fountains and any kind of thing like that. What we see is a host of credentials necessary to enter a particular market or a space, right? So this is, and so when we talk about legacy markets, the cannabis economy is a legacy market we have full access to, just like we did in bootleg and alcohol. It isn't until they begin to credentialize that system that we are no more, right? We are no more, right? So we're talking about weed. It's weed. It grows everywhere, right? Like, it does not take a scientist to figure it out. And as a young man, I'll say as a young adult, right? I knew that I could break down an ounce into Aves and make a profit and buy some sneakers, right? I knew it was common sense. Break out 36, So now you got to go to university to learn that, right? And it's common sense, right? So I agree that it's turning into something, right? I just don't know that if what it's turning into is something our people, the people that were disadvantaged by cannabis, will have access to wholeheartedly if we deeply invest into their ideals around credentialism, right? We've professionalized this. Like, you see the cannabis, it's like, come on now, you're selling weed, right? Like, and why can't we keep it that way? And I think one of the biggest challenges for our youth is that they need to be able to see themselves in the markets that they're entertaining, right? So, and then and one thing about us is that if you show us in it, we'll do it. Like, I think half of us being great at hooping is because we see it as something that we could be great at, right? Within our own clothing, our own way of life, whatever, right? So when we look at the market, we need to be able to see figures like Vic Mensa, figures like Edie, et cetera, so people can be like, I want to be like Edie, right? In this market. What do I got to learn about that, right? But also just not, we also got to lower the buffer, because remember, it's like, I think it's 80 or 75% of young African-Americans aged 17 to 24 are out of work and out of school, right? So when we place these credentials on top of it, you got to understand those credentials are for people that can acquire them, right? And a lot of our folks can't acquire those credentials. So they're going to exist in this new informal economy until whenever. And we got to ensure also that there's less restriction. That the police don't crack down on folks that are selling weed outside of the, you can sell weed right out in front of the dispensary and go to jail, but you can buy it inside of the dispensary. And there's a very big problem there. And so equity and transformation essentially is part of this movement until the market softens up in ways that our folks can enter in and out as they please. And I know that may be bad for some folks, but I think that's the way it needs to be. I would love to see the day we could just give out weed for free. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so, like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's problematic with the market. So I'll leave it there.
I want to jump in off something that Rich just said and just break down a couple little statistics. There was a study done in recent years in Chicago with high school students where, 1,500, 1,600 kids were given summer jobs. That employment was shown to reduce violent crime overall, including violent crime, among those students by 43%. To have employment. And when you look at unemployment across the board, obviously as Black people, young Black men, Black women, we are inherently criminalized. But when you even remove the racial category and you compare unemployed communities, the levels of violence are nearly identical. So employment, it needs to be one of our first pillars of focus in my eyes. And then education, because policing, as we know, does not reduce crime. What does actually reduce crime is education, all the way down from early childhood education, which is something that most people in Black and brown communities can't afford. Children 3 and 4 years old that receive preschool education are 70% less likely to get arrested for a crime by the age of 18 than those who don't. And we're talking about a city in which a lot of these shootings are happening by 16, 17-year-old kids. So that's another angle. And our healthcare, our mental health. The reason why so many of us are self-medicating, 3 out of 5 of every state prisoners have a substance abuse problem. Half of state and federal prisoners are in serious psychological distress or have a history of mental illness. So what you see here is that we are purposefully kept unemployed we're giving poor education. I didn't even speak about how we receive, you know, hundreds less dollars per student in our schools that have never been integrated than those in Lincoln Park. And I know because I've been to both schools, you know. But we're unemployed, our schools are substandard, and our mental health is not being addressed because there's also a wealth barrier for mental health care. So this money needs to be coming into our hands so that we can be employing our people, we can be subsidizing our education, and we can be giving free healthcare and mental health care to the communities impacted by this shit. That's the only way. And you know, going back to the first question, when you asked if we felt that social equity was possible, I'm of the opinion that it has to happen, and that it is an imperative. It's not an if or maybe. Is that it has to happen, and I believe that we have the power to make it happen, but we got to press. We got to go hard.
And I just want to talk about kind of the reparations kind of question, and I agree with everyone on the panel that it's definitely necessary, and how do we do that's the question. The challenge is, as an operator, if you own one dispensary, sometimes it could not be as lucrative as you thought. Because a lot of times you're paying taxes on your gross revenue to municipalities off top, right? You're paying a 280E tax, which is tax off gross profit, so you can't run through your SG&A expenses. So, you know, a lot of times people think, well, I own a dispensary, therefore, you know, Scrooge McDuck swimming in money. The reality of it is actually the opposite. And a lot of times you can make a profit, but you end up paying a double tax on it. So now you really lose all that profit to the IRS. So I think things have to change in a sense of being able to be profitable with just one single dispensary. Now, I'd hope that if legislation actually happened from a reparation standpoint, maybe some ideas are saying if you're a Black-owned cannabis company, you're taxed differently. Right. So, you know, you don't have to be taxed the same way as another group, you know, to kind of see it as a reparation standpoint. But again, it becomes very challenging as an operator to be very profitable if you don't have those relationships. You know, just take it for an example, Grassroots just sold for $840 million to Curaleaf. That owner, I know him personally. He started off with one dispensary. The way you get to that valuation is by, you know, doing what business folks do, acquiring, going to every market and gobbling up, you know, market share. And it's very, very challenging for folks to have one dispensary to do that, especially if you're a social equity and won't have the proper resources. So I think there should be some things with the operators of how can we, you know, make sure this is profitable for them so they don't lose their license, or they can't make payroll, or they can't do things and forced to sell their business because the profit margins really aren't there yet.
When we talk about
go ahead, please.
we talk about things that we are advocating for and trying to legislate for, that all means being in the room, right? So if we are not at those tables and being in those rooms, we can't advocate for shit. None of that stuff is going to happen. We're all going to be talking amongst ourselves, and, you know, it should have happened this way and it should have happened that way. Well, five years down the road, the people who were at those tables are getting shit done for themselves. And so these conversations need to be had at the Capitol, in the business rooms, in the boardrooms.
With that in mind, and I hope you can hear me okay. I think my connection is a little weak, but I wanted to share with all of you that we are having a really serious problem with the cultivation centers wanting to unionize. Because when we had our first campaign with Cresco out in Joliet, which they also won their unionizing campaign, there was a big problem and a big disappointment.
Moises, you're breaking up a little bit there, my guy.
And that is that Cresco excluded the gardeners from being in the union, and excludes agriculturists back in who were African American, and they wanted to exclude them from having the right to unionize. And in 2020, that legislation still applied to agricultural cultivation workers in the cannabis industry. So there's a lot of work that we need to do, and there's a lot that we need to push back on if we want to really see things improve. I see a lot of disappointment with the industry using these kind of old laws when workers want to improve their working conditions. And again, these are experts in the industry. Another thing that they're doing is misclassifying workers when they want to unionize. All of a sudden, giving them a position management when they were never issued before and never paid for managers. So I really do hope that we can continue working and taking it to Springfield to make sure that this is equitable, and these companies, especially the big ones that are coming into our neighborhoods, really respect the people that are working for them and really respect the right to unionize, because these workers are doing it because they want to improve their skills, and they want to give back to the industry, and they want to have careers. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. Ron, looked like you were going to say something?
Yeah, so I mean, this actually ties in from everything Vic said to what Moises said. I mean, the reality is, I think we've got to be a lot more holistic in our views in terms of, like, one, how we get money back to our communities. I think it's absolutely great that there's been so much attention to cannabis, because there's a direct correlation, right, that I think everyone understands. But the reality is like, I've been in rooms over the last year where I've seen more Black people talking about the political process than I have with other industries, right? So we've got to start looking at the state budget in a much more holistic way, realizing the fact also that, like, the cannabis revenues are not the solution to everything, right? Like, we need more money than what's going to come in from cannabis. I mean, gaming, utilities, all of those industries that exist where there's a disparity in terms of where Black people are on the ladder. Like, we've got to be looking at all of that. The second thing that I would just say to Edie's point is that, you know, along with, like, this notion of cooperative economics that I constantly preach, because I'm telling you, like, when this comes in the fall, like, we're going to look up and white companies are going to steal everything. But also just this notion of collective empowerment. So, like, you know, Edie is consistently in Springfield, right? Which is something that it takes to make change in Springfield, right? And as someone that has, like, spent basically every spring in Springfield since 2008, I can tell you that random calls to legislators that, like, might pretend to be your friend, right? Or, like, 1 or 2 lobby days will not get it done, right? And we have to, like, consistently apply pressure if we want this big change that we want. So I would just throw those 2 things out there, just as kind of, I guess, continuing the cold water that Jamil tried to throw at the industry.
I want to say something just to piggyback on that. I think that we're also living in a movement moment or a political moment where there are new possibilities. And I'm really sad that, like, in the forefront of the demands is not this billion-dollar industry that is, like, people, you know, like the current conversation. If this was about something else, there'd be 1,000 people here. Yeah. But talking about racial equity in cannabis is not the thing right now. And I mean, I would love to think with everybody that's in this room or on this panel, how do we make it important? Because there's old economies that we got to fight for reparations for. There's a new economy that exists right now that we can demand equity in right now, and these people are on their heels. These cannabis dispensaries are putting out Black Lives Matter posters and signs while they literally have no Black employees, and they get by with just that, right? And they send out swag bags to all of the nonprofits. Tokens. And it's like, oh, you know, boom, you know. But have you changed your management? What does the ownership structure look like? Who owns the shares? Are you sharing? You know, none of those conversations are happening because right now it's just we're living in a political moment where like, yes, defund these jails and these institutions, refund our communities in these specific ways. That's one way the state can play a part. But also to these institutions that made $40 million in their first month. What is your commitment to Black Lives Matter right now? And I don't think that we've had that discussion. So I'd love to hear more from, you know, all of the folks that spend a lot of time in Springfield. Has there been any new developments in the realm of cannabis, you know, policy development during this moment?
No, and quite frankly, there probably won't be until the licenses are awarded, right? So there was a very concentrated effort by the administration to say like no perks for the industry, right? So like even 280E, which is a very simple thing, like don't pass that until we find out what these new awardees look like. So that's some of it. But I would also just say like there's still so much education that we have to do to people in the community about what their options are, right? So like ahead of this application process, like telling people, oh yeah, you can negotiate your operating agreement. You don't have to take the first thing that somebody hands you, right? I'm hearing the same thing on like the city dispensary process where people are like, oh, well, we'd like to make you a part owner, but we can't, it has to be the same ownership. And the truth is like, they should give you ownership in the first company instead of the +1, and then that solves the issue. But like our folks don't know how to talk, you know, to these companies in this moment where they really do have them over a barrel. Cause like, quite frankly, like most of them are publicly traded, right? So there's a reason Nike and all these big brands are throwing out ads right now about Black Lives Matter. These companies know what their base is. They know who wants to buy from them long term. They know what they need to go into other states to get licensed. Now is the time for us to really like, again, hold their feet to the fire. But it takes like the folks like this panel, folks that are listening to this panel, to be educated so that they can push back and provide that given back and forth that's necessary.
Yeah, and we're seeing the most basic things come out of the MSOs. You know, they may hire a CSR person, or they may put somebody Black on their board, or, you know, a Black Lives Matter statement. It's just like the most basic things that they can do, when what they really should be doing is helping us, is helping all of us, you know, do that work and get to those communities. But I'll also say we need to continue to normalize the conversation within our communities and within those other funders, those foundations. They got money. They have resources. They can get doors open. But the minute you say you're here to talk about cannabis, oh no, what? I can't even tell you how many grants that we've applied for that went nowhere because the word marijuana is in our name. And that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, and I agree with all that as well. And I would just say this, as consumers, you know, we just need to be mindful of who we're purchasing, what we're purchasing, right? And I think we kind of control some of that as well as the consumer. You know, to be honest with you, I'm a heavy consumer of cannabis, and I have yet to buy a product in Illinois from a dispensary because no one of color owns anything. So when it comes to, you know, us being heavy consumers of the product, you know, we hope this round of social equity applicants will create that. So now Black and brown women, we can, all minorities, we can go to a, you know, dispensary, pick out a brand that we like that's, you know, produced by, sold by, and packaged by people of color. And we hope that will change some of the narrative. So, you know, we have to be mindful as consumers and making sure we're buying and standing up for, you know, for folks that look like us and supporting us in that, you know, in that usage of cannabis.
I'm gonna go ahead and man, the conversation's hot, boy. I'm telling you, that's a good one. It is great. But for the sake of time, because I do want to save some time for the Q&A, I'm gonna go ahead and end the panel there. I'm gonna open up the floor for a Q&A. So our attendees, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat now.
There's one in the Q&A too.
Oh, do we have one?
There's one in the Q&A.
Oh, we do have one in the Q&A. Okay, so all right, so I'm gonna go ahead and read our first question. Thank you, Vic, for connecting with local Black and POC-owned organizations as you enter the space. One of the biggest frustrations as Black advocacy groups is that whenever we hear about a Black celebrity entering the industry, they are partnering with or shouting out using their platform to promote big white corporations and organizations. It often feels like they didn't even try to find the orgs that have been doing the work at a grassroots level long before it was cool or lucrative to do so. More of a,
I don't think that's a question.
Yeah, that was more of a statement, more of a question.
Thank you, Vic.
But it's all love.
It's all love, though.
Thank you, guys. I'm just if I could say anything in response to that, it's just that you know, I've been blessed to come into communication with so many of the people on this panel that have given me so much information, because, you know, I work tirelessly on behalf of the community, and because I am of the community, you know what I'm saying? And I think that what Rich said is so spot on because we're focused on so many necessary oppressive structures that need to be reduced for our survival. But here is this whole other opportunity that if and when we can help to direct some of this conversation over here, you know what I'm saying? This is a real ticket to make a lot of the things that we're shooting for in the Defund the Police campaign happen. Word.
Oh, you know what? No, thank you, Vic. Actually, our person that asked that one question followed up. So he followed up with that question. I should have followed up with that. What's up with that? Oh yeah, you answered. You already answered that, Vic. So I appreciate that. I think she also said, also, can you spread that message within your industry?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, my industry is probably like the biggest marketing tool for cannabis on the planet. And that's real though. That's real. I think that's something that needs to become a part of the conversation. And as I got like a lot of new music, a lot of my dopest shit ever coming out very shortly. And so I'm gonna be doing more press and these things. And as I'm doing those things, that's definitely gonna be something that I'm pushing, because it's like, well, we always shouting out the new weed, this, that, and the third, but so little of the industry, if any, is Black, that literally we are constantly just promoting, you know, what are these companies that none of them are owned by us, you know what I mean? So yes, that's a good idea.
We got another question. What is the current racial makeup of the Illinois employees in the cannabis industry? Is it fair to say Blacks make up less than 10% across the state?
Probably.
And do you want to jump in on that one?
I don't think there's an actual number. I know the MJ Biz Daily Report just came out. I'm not sure if the demographics are in there. But I will say your Black and brown folks are going to be more at the entry level than they are in leadership roles, for sure.
Yeah, there's no current demographic data on employees in the state, but that'll be part of the disparity study that comes up in the spring.
And I think this is why ownership is very important. Again, when you own something, you can pick and choose who you want to hire. And if we own it, therefore, you know, the onus comes back on us to pick and choose the best and brightest from our own communities.
Moses, I believe you're saying something.
Yeah, that demographic is actually not as big as it should be. It's small.
I have actually a question for the group. So this was directed to our queens on the panel. You know, it's kind of a known thing that the cannabis industry has a higher retention for female managers or people or women in leadership positions are in cannabis. I think it's 17% if I'm right, when compared to other industries. Do you feel like the cannabis industry can be this space for people of color to finally flourish in an industry where we're allowed to be ourselves, wear our hair the way we want, kind of speak the way we want, and not have to worry about those corporate rules and those guidelines that kind of dictate us in our lives, that kind of, you know, people have tried to run away from?
I come from corporate America, and when I tell you I will show up at a business meeting with jeans on and look everybody in the eye like, yes, I have jeans on because I'm not in corporate America anymore. That's what I do. Number one. Number two, I was just talking to someone about this. I feel like Black people or African Americans, however you want to label us, we don't get treated as a culture like everyone else, right? So culturally speaking, like some of the things that we do, the way we talk, the way we carry ourselves, the way we even like have disagreements, it's not considered cultural. It's considered, oh, you ghetto. And that's something I feel like I can talk openly about being in the cannabis industry compared to maybe some other industries that I've been a part of.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I believe federal government IT contracting is probably like the most white place I'd ever been. As you see, I'm Black, my locks are orange, and I, didn't really care. But I feel like being a part of this industry has empowered me to be more comfortable in, I guess, my skills and my knowledge and what I bring to the table. So I definitely agree with Shawnee on that.
It's been a long time since I worked for a white company or with a bunch of non-Black people. But I have to say that the Black people that I do see working in this space and working on our board and working with Chicago Nrml feel that we are very comfortable in our skin. We talk the way we talk. We walk the way we walk. We rep what we rep. And yeah, we don't have a problem with that, with being ourselves at all. And but I have, I've had the opportunity to peek into one of the MSOs, and I saw more Black people working there in the offices than I had expected. I was like, oh damn, it's a lot of Black people up in here, but they didn't look very comfortable. Not at all. They didn't look very comfortable. They were all on top of each other and working in pods and. Ooh,
so we're going to extend this 5 more minutes because this is a really great question. So Moises, we're going to go with you, and then we're going to take one more question.
I would invite us to really push on these companies to make sure that they have that same environment for the employees, because you know what? We don't see it. We do not see it. That energy that you just mentioned, unfortunately, when you are an employee, you are expected to be in a certain way, to react in a certain way. And to us, we see no difference from corporate Walmart and all these other companies.
That's because those are not Black companies.
I think it's a good start.
Moises, that's because those are not Black companies. If to Jamil's point, we are hiring who, you know, they are our companies, and we're hiring people who we're comfortable with and who are comfortable with us, you can bet, you know, you might be walking around with no shoes on one day, because that's just the way you get, you know what I'm saying? You're going to be comfortable with your people.
Absolutely.
I'll add a little bit to that too. Like, I remember when Alex was interviewing with me, just randomly, but I was telling him, like, let your hair down, knock it off.
True.
Wear a mask here. You know, like our people got to consistently code switch in order to enter these spaces, in order to have these conversations. Like, let this be a space where you can lay your burdens down and just be who you are. You know what I'm saying? And I think that that's the freedom. And I also say, I do believe, I know that my Marxist friends may get mad at me about the fact that we need to own businesses. And I'll say that as a formerly incarcerated person who owned a business, right, who founded a nonprofit, and I own my own S Corp, whatever, I have a lot more freedom and ownership than I did. I own a house in the neighborhood that I couldn't rent in. Do you understand what I'm saying? I tried to rent in this neighborhood. They told me no because of my background check. When I went to buy, they didn't say, they didn't check nothing but the numbers. So I see there's freedom in that. And I want to say also to Moises, like, I've always been a fan and a supporter of unions. I need UFCW to commit to the racial justice fight, not just the organizing fight, right? So I get once they get into the shop, we organize and sure they have better benefits and all of that. But on the front end, when we began doing this equity fight, we wanted to see y'all there. And I want to see you supporting Edie down in Springfield because, as you know, this is a union state. The CFL, et cetera, can get behind a bill, get behind a policy measure, and ensure that it's successful. So I'm looking on this panel specifically like folks like Edie, folks like Ron, that are down, that are fighting for racial justice, and we don't see unions. And then as soon as we get the contract, then the unions pop up, right? And so I want to ensure that, like, your commitment in this moment and other commitments in these moments is that we're trying to work together to achieve a specific end, right? And that is that we have beautiful, brilliant, Black-led institutions, and then if they choose to unionize their workforce or whatever, then that be the case. If they choose to do a co-op, they can do that as well. So I'm saying that, and I'm gonna shut up now. But
I'm sorry guys, I'm gonna go on. We have one last question. We have 3 questions that are kind of similar, so I'm just gonna combine them into one. Going forward, what can individuals do to push this conversation to increase the list of Black-owned cannabis businesses? P.S. How can we promote leadership and development? Anybody want to chime in on that one?
I would say definitely join these organizations. There's so many of them. I can't tell you how many meetings I sit in on every week, but like, I'm able to, because I sit in on these meetings and I'm like a part of the organizations, like I can speak to what's going on and what the plans are. And even like, you know, like if the coalition is talking about something that another minority owned organization is talking about, I can say, y'all should talk to each other because y'all have the same, you know, goals. Let's get on the calendar so we can talk about this together.
Right. We don't need to dilute each other.
Well, that's it, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end it there. This has been, I mean, honestly, one of the most spirited cannabis conversations I've ever been a part of. So it's been an honor and a pleasure for me. Again, my name is Alexander Perez. It's been an honor to be your host for our first ever virtual chronic conversation. I really want to give a round of applause for our amazingly talented panelists. I mean, this is a really, really dope group of individuals. This is recorded. I think we kind of missed the beginning mark, but this is recorded. So we will be able to provide this recording to folks that want to see this, that didn't get a chance to this, because I mean, this needs to be watched. I mean, we're talking about the conversation of pushing education and pushing enlightenment. These are the type of conversations and videos that people need to be watching from people of color, talking about issues that people of color are facing, you know, when it comes to the industry. So everybody, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time on a Saturday to be here with us. With that, I'm going to close the event, but thank you guys again. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Until we meet again next time, guys. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Great job. Great job.
Hi, thank you.
Be safe, y'all.
Thank
you. Don't be no stranger, Jamil.